everyone. Welcome to the Worship Artistry Podcast. My name is Jason Houtsma, and with me is
Christina Kislanka.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey guys.
Hey guys. Just been working on my influencer
You have been.
stuff, even though some of it's not gone so well.
It's okay.
I got blocked.
Jason thought that it was funny to replicate.
It was funny
to replicate someone else's video and to make it all
Okay.
influency.
Well, the thing is, I've been more active on Instagram and everything.
He has been.
And everyone's always known how I feel about like quote unquote influencers. And but I've been doing stuff because it's been fun and it's getting to interact with people and everything. And so my wife and I were away at this cabin for a couple of days, which was wonderful. And, but you pointed out to me, they're like, oh, this
Influencer was just at this exact same cabin. Like, what is the likelihood of that?
Right. So she shot this video. It's it's clearly that place. And so I'm like, I'm going there. I'm going to just do it shot for shot. So it was like a reel. And I'm like,
Great
so
thought.
I was like, this will be hilarious. And it was, because I put myself playing guitar in her exact
That's
shots.
a very beautiful video.
It was perfectly timed. I was so proud of it. I was like, nailed this one.
Your version of this video still exists.
It is. Yeah, you can go to jason.houtsma or at jason.houtsma.
Yes, on Instagram.
On Instagram and see what it looked like and know that this is the exact same thing somebody else did. Now it's a little out of context though, because within 20 minutes she had blocked me and taken everything down.
And
I was like,
unfortunately blocked me along with him.
she's like,
Which is so sad. I'm so sad.
So, I thought of, I was like, if I was younger and more vitriolic and had way more time on my hands, I would just go recreate every one of her videos.
That is called stalking.
That's fair. It's just something like it's a prank I could see myself having done in college. That's like a
sure
college level
pre-social media.
Yeah, I know. I actually felt bad because then you start going like, well, why were you concerned about this?
Yeah,
like, what's the problem? But you can't contact them because you're blocked.
You.
Well, you know who hasn't blocked me?
Who, Jason?
It's Chris Hoisington.
Wow, who is Chris Hoisington?
Chris Hoisington, he is one part of Brothers McClurg. He also was very involved in producing the Bellsberg sessions, which we were just talking about with Andrew Greer. Mm-hmm. And you should also know that actually, I think today, the album Deep Valley, which is a live concert that Rich Mullins recorded at a camp back in like 83 or something. They just released that as an album, which is
today as of February 8th? 9th?
Yeah.
We'll include a link for it in the description of this podcast.
To it. It's going to be sweet.
Yes.
But anyway, so Chris was kind of the guy behind a lot of the sound, kind of what was kind of the approach to it. He was really captured by Rich's his Jesus record, kind of more the demo style things. And Chris actually has been on our podcast before. He was actually one of my favorite episodes because he talked about using the recording studio as an instrument because he really kind of thinks about it in that way. And so he's a great conversation. He's always a great hang. And so without further ado, Chris Hoisington.
It has been a while. It has been it's funny, out of all the we're on, I don't know, episode 170 something or whatever, but like one of my all-time favorites was using the studio as an instrument. And it was cool because you were just getting started with like Old Bear, and like I actually looked at our text, I was like 2018, holy cow. So a lot's been going on. It's good to see. I mean, I've been following all the Bellsberg stuff, and it's I want to ask you about all the things, just all the stuff that you got going on, because it seems like a lot.
Yeah, man. The Bellsberg thing started probably not long after the conversation we last had, but a friend came up to make a record, and he's like a huge Rich Mullins fan. And I mean, I always knew the random Rich Mullins song, like everybody does, because he's got so many, but I've never dove deep into his catalog. But he in particular was like, you got to hear this record called the Jesus record. And they have other side of the record that's just the demos of him in a church, just with a boombox playing the songs. And I definitely was not into the Jesus record, the production And with a lot of Rich Mullins stuff, it tends to be the production is very dated to whatever time, the 90s or 80s or whatever the label was trying to chase. And so when I heard the demos, I immediately was like blown away by just the rawness of it and the purity of it, and reminded me of like those early folk writers that would just, like Woody Guthrie, playing on the back of a train with like a recorder next to him or something. And so I immediately, my brain just started going like, that is the perfect idea for a record. Like, approach it as demos, a demo style record, a record he never intended to be the direction of a record. He was just documenting songs with a tape recorder. And so immediately just got me thinking about, man, wouldn't it be cool to do a Rich Mullins record of covers done in that demo style? And then a little while after that, and we had also, a friend of mine said, hey, he's his old house is still outside of Nashville in this place called Bellsberg. He didn't say Bellsberg at the time, but he was like, I drive by his house sometimes. And so we ended up getting in touch with the lady who lives in his house now, that Rich gifted her the house when he moved to like Kansas or something like that. And she was open to the idea of us tracking it in her house, which to me just kind of deepened the story. I'm like, oh man, this is just it almost turns it into more of an experience, than just recording a record in some studio somewhere. And so, but then COVID hit, and so it derailed it for like a year and a half. And then we got in, the fall of 2019, I think was the first, no, what am I saying? The fall of 2021 or something like that. And so we got in there and did the first sessions with, who was there the first time? Like, I think Amy Grant came in with Andrew Greer and and Cindy Morgan, and they did a song called Sparrow Watcher, which was cool because each artist also kind of picked a song that was meant something to them. The song that Brothers McClure did, Heaven is Waiting, was only recorded on a musical that he wrote called Tanticle of the Plains that we did a version of. And so we left it up to each artist to like pick their song that meant something to them of Rich Mullins' catalog. And so I think that kind of helped deepen the story. And obviously Dave Trout from UTR, and he was the guy who introduced me to Andrew Greer. Andrew Greer obviously is extremely connected in Nashville, and he had just written a book about Rich Mullins, that Winds of Heaven, Stuff of Earth book with Randy Cox. So he and I talked, we hit it off, and he immediately was like, hey, I can help you connect the dots here in Nashville because I know a lot of these people, and I just got done writing this Rich Mullins book, and so I've been connecting with a bunch of these people. So, but yeah, I mean, it was from that to, I don't know if we also reissued an early Rich Mullins concert from the 80s called Deep Valley that it came out to everybody on Kickstarter, but doesn't officially come out until next year. We did that on CD and vinyl, and that's a whole other story, but I've been working with Beth, who has since the early days went to college with Rich. And so she has all these tapes of different concerts, all these wild early versions of songs. Like, she just sent me one the other day of right after he wrote that song, I See You. And he came to her house or her apartment, and he's like, I want to teach you this song. He just wrote this song. And he's singing it, and she's doing the echo parts, but it's just him and the guitar. And it's so fragile and so perfectly personal, that Old Bear started with her to develop like an archival series of Rich Mullins recordings because I like more of that stuff. I like the more raw sounding stuff, like him at the piano or him and just a guitar, more simple. I mean, in some ways, when I hear I See You, him doing the version, I'm like, this could be a new, really popular worship song again. If they, just heard it this way, because it's not with all the 90s U2 dated production of that time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was always kind of the thing that was funny to me. With Rich Mullins, everyone's like, "Oh, the awesome God guy," and you're like, "Oh,
yeah.
I mean, come on, like,
Yeah.
that one exists, yes, but let's talk about a Liturgy of Legacy. Let's talk about Sometimes by Step and these other songs that are just so much more, timeless."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was an amazing journey to it's doing records like that can be very difficult. I was saying to somebody, I think probably doing a compilation record for any producer would be the hardest thing to tackle, and not make it just seem like a bunch of one-offs of guys that just recorded it in different studios. There's no cohesion. It's more from a label's perspective, it's always more about the individual songs making the money, not so much how does this gel as an actual piece of art or whatever. And so I was very intentional and was talking constantly about, like, let's redeem the idea of a compilation record and actually do something with all these people involved and actually make it very cohesive and this is the idea, this is kind of how we're going to approach it. And there was 3 songs that we weren't able to track at his house just because of either proximity or, like, I think Sarah Groves tracked in her house at her studio. Carolyn Aaron's, because she's in like British Columbia, Canada. And then the third one was Jason Gray did a song called Here in America that we actually recorded it at the house, and he was not happy with the way he sounded, his voice. And it's a tough way to record, because you basically, you have to show up and be on, and if you're not good, it's not, there's nothing we can do to cover it up. And I'm not saying he's not good. I'm just saying he was great. He did a great job on the song. Just there was a couple times where it was hard to get a version that wasn't too far out, that felt like, okay, it's the right amount of mess up that still feels cool and appropriate. So
in doing that, because you guys did it, I mean, pretty much live. I mean, at least the videos look like it's like people just standing around a microphone and it's like, go. So obviously the talent pool that you had to pull from is amazing, because in those scenarios, it's just kind of like, how do you sound? Go ahead and do it. And that's what it is. Right. But at the same time, it doesn't, how do I say it? It doesn't feel like it's kind of like you said, it's like it feels raw in all the right ways. Like you still hear all the guitars, you still hear all the vocalists, you still hear. What were some of your approaches to actually, like, even just like mic technique and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we just had a couple like Neumann microphones, room mics that we used, that Evan, the guy who is he engineered all the sessions, would basically kind of just place them in the right, like, okay, well, Ron Block is playing banjo on this song and more lead, so I'm going to point this mic more at him, even though it's just as far away from him as it is from the person playing rhythm guitar. So there's just a lot of like that type of stuff, or like 3 people singing harmony around a mic. Well, this person sings a lot louder here, so she needs to back up like a foot and then lean in when she sings her lead parts. We had to do a bunch of stuff like that, and then we'd have the little tape recorder set up in the middle of the room, like Rich could have done with his demos, and they would push record on that. We had that going the whole time. So some of the songs you can really hear. The tape is mixed into all of the tracks with the room mics, and we wanted to have the ability to have the lo-fi and not be totally married to the lo-fi, to be able to do a little bit better than what Rich did. You know, obviously that some of those recordings are really rough, where you can't even hear what he's saying because it's so rough. So we wanted it, you know, we didn't want to, like, you know, I knew that if I went all the way with it, some things I've tried on other records, especially in Christian music, they would, you know, moms and grandmas would not get it. And they would be like, why does this sound bad? You know, like I could tell you stories of, like, I mean, one record we started out with, like, the radio dial thing, like spinning between stations for like 30 seconds. And some lady brought the CD back at a concert, and she was like, my CD's broken. I can't get it to work. It's just static, you know? And so it's, you know, we're kind of in a genre where art is not always appreciated in the way that maybe it is in other, you know, art in the church has a practicability. Is it practical? Is it usable? And so I think with this, we tried to marry it as much as we could, where it was like a nod to, like, Rich, maybe something Rich would have done if he was alive today and was not making, you know, top 40 music, or who knows, you know, who knows what he would be doing. But we tried to, like, kind of hit all those bases. I mean, we did the CD release concert for it in Nashville, and one of the best things that I heard was, you know, Andrew Peterson came and found me outside after, and he was like, man, this is like the Rich Mullins tribute album I've always wanted. And thanks for letting me be a part of it. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, thank you. So when you hear stuff like that, you feel like, you know, and I haven't always, you know, outside of the few records that Brothers has done, you know, we've always kind of been outside of the industry since then. And so, but, you know, we happen upon these ideas, and I kind of like to be outside of the Nashville thing a little bit, so that I can kind of have a fresh perspective to do things like what we did with the Rich thing. Not that there aren't people making great records in Nashville. I'm just saying that, like, you know, it was a blessing to have all these people come together, and, you know, make something like this happen and be okay with it, you know? And I don't know.
You know, you had, it was so interesting to me, because it was like you had people like Andrew Peterson there, you had you guys, you know, you had kind of the spectrum, you had Mitch McVicker, you know, like you got and then you got like Amy Grant, and you know, all these, like, people from all over the spectrum, but they all seem to, I mean, they all seem to really fit really well. Did you find, was there kind of an energy around recording this way, because it's so not the way we're used to, with like, oh, and then we're going to tune the vocal, and then the guitar is going to be over here, we got to make sure we isolate that, and that's going to be stereo, and like, was there kind of a little, it seemed like everybody seemed to enjoy the energy of it?
I would say that was 100. I think that made it special, because David McCracken, who was Rich Mullins' manager for a while when he was alive, he was best friends with Rich. He would come in every day. We would record, and he'd made this banana nut bread that Rich's mom used to make for him all the time, and he made all these loaves to hand out to all the artists, with like in a little gift bag with like a bunch of photographs of Rich through the years, and like a thank you card. And it just was very homemade. And same with Connie Hawk, who owned the house. She just went above and beyond to like create an environment. Like when I showed up, there was like, you know, Rich Mullins vinyl around, and like when he was on the cover of CCM and all these different things, like she decorated it in a way that was very like stuff he had around when he was alive. You know, his pipes were hanging on the wall, and And then, like I said, Beth came from Cincinnati every time, and she's the one who is kind of the keeper of the early Rich Mullins music. She just sat on the porch the whole time. That was, and would just talk to people. So it ended up becoming this just hang time. When you look at the artwork, it's just pictures of people hanging around the house and showing up. I mean, that's basically how it was the whole time tracking. And that was the first time I met Jimmy Abag, is when he showed up to record. And now I'm actually in the middle of doing a record with him and Matt Slocum from Sixpence, and Phil Madeira, who also played with Rich, and Steve Hindalong, and Ben Pearson. Ben Pearson was like a photographer for Rich for years. I'm making a record with them right now, and I met some of those guys because of this record. So I'm saying it was like the fruit of friendship was definitely had because of it. And I think you hit it on the head. I mean, everybody who came just wanted to hang out. So like Jimmy recorded early in the morning, and he just ended up staying the whole day. It was like, can someone give me a ride home now? It was like how it was. Tommy Sims, who is, if you don't know the guy, look him up on Google. He wrote that song Change the World that Eric Clapton does. Mm-hmm. He toured with Bruce Springsteen playing bass. He produced a bunch of CeCe Winans records. I mean, he's a big deal. He showed up and just had so much fun. He played on Sparrow Watcher, and later he texted Andrew Greer and said, I don't even want to get paid for this. Like, I just haven't had this much fun in a studio in a while. Like, it just was refreshing.
Yeah.
If you call it a studio, whatever you want to call it. And I think for me, I've always wanted to try to create experiences for people more than we're just here in a studio, So try to create that feeling of, you can't create a legacy record all the time, but you try to create something that will, maybe not be commercially successful right away, but it blesses people. And the comments that I'm hearing are just, I love how they approach this. I love that they kept it, how they recorded it, how simple it is. And just, that's just what I'm hearing, and I think, and I didn't know, we had no idea that it was going to raise 170, whatever it raised on Kickstarter. That was just like in like 3 days or 4 days, whatever it was. It was nuts.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that. Let's go. Yeah, you can keep going if you want. I'd like to know a little more about that, because I've been kind of watching what you guys have done. Kind of looking at Old Bear, and like it seems like you're doing a lot of things. Like that's kind of how you're raising funds to do records. It's not like, hey, walk in here with your record label budget. It's like you're finding artists and going, I don't know, are you finding them or are they finding you? Like the Kickstarter thing seems to be a big part of how everybody's paying for this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. 100%. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now with Jimmy and Phil and those guys. We're making the record now, and then at the end of January we'll launch the Kickstarter for this project. But there will also, Lord willing, there'll be another Rich Mullins reissue attached to that Kickstarter. But yeah, it is. I'm both fan, like I have people that record with me all the time and I get paid, and that's great. And then there's just sometimes you have these ideas, these crazy ideas of like, I want to do this record and I'm just going to do it and figure it out, and let's just see what maybe this Kickstarter thing. It wasn't like this was a passion project for me. And then it turned into something more, and so I kind of always am balancing those things. Is like, I don't want to be a guy who's just like, I'm all about money. Obviously I got to provide for myself, but I also think if you're willing to take chances, if you have a good idea, and you have enough people who are in it with you that rally around it with you, it can happen, you know? And so that was Dave Trout to me, even though he runs UTR Media, he's kind of like a part of Old Bear too. Like when we were just doing the record in Nashville last week, he stopped by with like a whole cooler of drinks and water and like a sandwich tray. We kind of had some of the same like homemade vibes of the Rich record. And he's the guy who's kind of helping Old Bear in the capacity of Kickstarter, and he's good at it. And so, yeah, for that record and this record in particular, it makes sense to go about it that way. And then kind of let the chips fall, because I also think the fruit of friendship and just relationship that come from being in the same room with some of these people who are like, man, this guy, who is this kid? He's, you know, would never, most of them don't know who Brothers McClurg is. But it's, you know, it leaves an impression for sure, you know? So I have lots of ideas of things I'd like to do in the future. I'm just trying to, you know, space them out in a way that, like, you know, I can make it happen. So, but that's right now we're just in a good place with it, you know. It just released November 4th, so we'll fit like the whole thing. So yeah, so we're just kind of
awesome.
We're going next week, my brother and I and Jeremy, back to Nashville because we're backing up Kevin Max for his Winter Woods weekend. I just recorded his Christmas record, which is really interesting and kind of weird, and we did lots of cool harmonies and things on it. He did a bunch of really old English carols that we set to music. So that'll be a fun hang, you know? So, and he did a song on the Rich record too, that You Didn't Have a Home, which is one of my favorites.
It's one of my favorites too. There's so many good lines in that one.
Yeah, that was funny. He did that in like 3 takes. All right, you think you got everything you need? You know? It's great. And Mitch just showed up that day with his harmonica and was like, I'm gonna play harmonica, and so he jumped in, and we just went for it, you know. Yeah, but
it's so good, man. It's I'm super grateful for it, because it's, you know, I like a Liturgy A Legacy and a Ragamuffin Band was a very influential record for me. And then having you know, a bunch of Rich's writings, and then when he died, he was like the first famous person who died that ever affected me. Like I was just like, what? Like, I mean, it like wrecked my day, you know. But it's like a lot of his older stuff is unbelievable, but to your point, it's very dated. Even going back, I was listening to Liturgy, and I'm like, oh man, some of the like the guitar tones in here, you know. And then Andrew Greer, I interviewed him like a couple of weeks ago, and he sent me the link for the concert. I was like, if you can find this for me, I missed it. No, for the concert you guys all did.
Oh, right.
With Compassion, you know. And so he's like, I think we got it around here somewhere. I was just like, please get me that concert, because I want to see it so bad. When it's wonderful. But yeah, like, you know, hearing Andrew Peterson sing Land of My Sojourn in the way that he does it, it's like so powerful, right? And it's like the way that you guys perform, like the Hello Old Friends, like there's just so much. I feel like it kind of moves all the production stuff out of the way and lets the lyrics shine, which to me have always been the like, these lyrics are timeless. They're amazing. They put me to shame, you know, like it's just, this man was so talented. And so the way that you've crafted it, it works great.
Here's a side anecdote too. So that record in particular, the Legacy, whatever, however you say the title, that record was supposed to be done originally in a barn with some microphones and just the band. And so Jimmy Abegg told me a whole story about it. And then at the last minute, he went back to the label. They didn't like the idea, so they went in the direction. So it made me think, like, what would it have sounded like if they did
Right.
it, just the band in the bar doing it, And so that's kind of was the genesis of the record I'm working on right now, because there's 3 guys in the band that were ragamuffins. It was like, well, let's do almost like a front porch type of vibe
Yeah.
record, that's like for sitting on the front porch, almost like the band version of Bellsberg is what we've been calling it, with a little bit more bells and whistles and things like that. But yeah, it's just and it's so to see that influence kind of trickle into other things of like, yeah, we were actually going to make that record in a barn, and then the label said no, and it would have been a totally different experience, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Not that the songs look great, but like you said, it I don't know. It feels like
just polished. It's very polished.
It's polished. Yeah. It's a sign of that time too. Yeah. So,
do you feel like, you were talking about kind of being an outsider from, outside of Nashville. And I know what you mean about Nashville. Nashville has a lot of great stuff, but they're definitely, every time I go there, I'm like, everything seems to just kind of push towards this like one stream. It's like, this thing is like, okay, that's cool. Let's take out all that stuff and just now it has what it needs, And
right.
And sometimes it's really great, and sometimes you're kind of like, but that's not really what we're trying to do here,
Right.
So between that and then also being a latecomer to the Rich Mullins world,
right?
Do you feel like that actually helped you? Like, I know for myself, I know that when I'm teaching songs, right? We've got like 600 songs on Worship Artistry, right? And I feel very differently about the bands that I'm a fan of, that I'm like, I'm doing this. It doesn't even matter the chart. I just love the song. We're doing this song. But I feel like almost like more attachment to it versus something that's like, hey, I'm trying to just do this. Like, do you feel like it was kind of helpful to be a little bit like a little coming from the outside? Or did you feel like, I got a lot to make up here?
To me, what spoke to me first was the production idea. And then I started to listen to his music more deeply, and I realized, wow, this guy can really craft lyrics. I think I don't know if, and yeah, I think it did help me because but there was no like, everything. It's like that Pedro the Lion lyric, if it isn't making dollars, it isn't making sense. I still think about that line all the time when it comes to like making records in this industry. And I think that there are producers that are really great at knowing how to hit the bullseye of what's popular. That's just not how I operate. I'm more like, hey, let's just do something totally different and see how it works. And we have these few ideas, and let's just kind of see. And I think that I do think in the 90s of Christian music, there was a much more of a scene of that, like Tooth and Nail, and that back when money was still more, music was making more money. So you had a lot of these offshoot underground labels, even in Christian music, that were doing really cool things. You just kind of don't see it that often. But I do think the coalescence of that with somebody like Rich, who still has such a loyal following. That's what blew me away, was how many people were, I don't know, just like still love the man to death. And, his life and work means so much to them. And it was obviously evident. So I feel like it was like a huge blessing to kind of be a part of that. When we had the CD release, like, I spent a bunch of time with David Mullins' brother, and his wife pulled me aside and just said how much this all really meant to David, and he's loved the whole process. And so, you hear stuff like that, and you got to think, well, it's definitely, what we're doing here is definitely more than just music. It's community, which ties back into our faith and the importance of that, And so I think if you can tap that, but Rich had a very unique way of, having birthday parties with 200 people at his house, just camped out on the floor, and he just had a way of just loving people who were estranged from the church. And I mean, even that weekend, Jimmy Abeg did an art show at Amy Grant's farm, and he was just telling stories of being on the road with Rich and kind of just how he was, you know. And so I think it's also that we happened to stumble upon something, and it happened to get tripped up because of COVID. So then it happened to be the 25th anniversary of his passing. It was just like a perfect storm of things that in my life I'll never quite see anything like that happen again. So I think that's why all of us that were a part of the production team, Andrew Greer, Evan Sealing, Dave Trout, and my brother from the label end to Beth Lutz, who was kind of helping with the early music. I don't know, it just was like a great moment in time that I'll always just grateful that I had some weird idea, and that I got enough people to help me and come alongside me and make it happen. Because if not, it wouldn't have been the way it was. And some of those guys I was connected to, you know, I've done records with Mitch and Kevin Max and Audrey Assad, and I have had conversations, and Derek Webb. But that, like, some of those people, like Amy Grant, I would, you know, that's like Andrew Greer knows, you know, his like best friend. He's really good friends with her. So it was great that she came in, because that track is one of my favorites, because I love how raw it is. And those people don't really record that way, nor do they need to. But in the way I like to hear things, I'm glad that it went the way it did, and that they're cool with it. So
yeah, it sounds so good. It really does. It opens up, like I said, it opens up the whole catalog, because you're going, oh, like, this isn't a way that I can hear it differently than just putting on something that, like you said, is like really dated. You know, I was laughing with Allie, with my wife. I was like, do you realize, like, he wrote "Sing Your Praise to the Lord"? Like you're just like, wait, what? You know,
dude. The funny thing is, too, I was just going to say, even in the back catalog, there's all these little scraps of great music that never got cut. You know, that one song that's on the record, "Whitewater," was one.
Yeah,
it's like an amazing song that just has been sitting in Beth's thing, you know, on her tape that we pulled it from. And since then, she'll just send me all this stuff. And yeah, I'm not as like into show tune Rich Mullins, you know, like that's kind of how they joke, like him at the piano doing the real, like, fast, not so much the songs where he's doing the Keith Green thing at the church, like you're which they're appropriate for the time. So we're sifting through to find that there's all these songs that have these great little singer-songwriter moments. There's this one called a Falling of So Many Tears that I think we're hoping to release at some point of his. It's just, there's a bunch of still really good stuff that's worth hearing if you're a fan of his, you know. So
for sure. I was so amazed at the way just some of the arrangements came together. So Andrew sent me a copy of work tapes. So I got to throw that in. So that's like upcoming, right? That's talked about. I can say that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, so I was listening to that and I was like, oh my gosh, they did The Color Green, that was the song that got me in. That was the one that, like, the lyrics of that song just destroy me. And I have tried to sit down on a guitar and turn that into something that I can play. And I'm just like, this is so, like, the timing is so weird. And like, how do I make this work? And so to actually hear it done, I was like, oh, that's how it's now made it accessible for me to express it, you know, which is
right.
Which is awesome. It's like really cool.
Yeah. That was like kind of a last minute decision from my brother and Andrew, actually, to, hey, let's invite other artists in to, now that we've set the pace with Bellsberg, why don't we invite other artists in to do versions of songs? So that was kind of where that all happened, which Old Bear does, like, demo stuff all the time. Like, where we've put out little demo series with people with their, artists on the label with their iPhones. So all that is like in our wheelhouse of stuff we like to do. We're talking about possibly doing another work tapes too. So we'll see kind of how it shakes out. But to be honest, once it got to work tapes, I was pretty like mentally checked. I was like
I'm good. I'm good.
I'm good. And really those guys kind of spearheaded that piece of it. I'm sure they gave me credit for it, but I honestly have just kind of been, by the time we finished a double LP of Bellsberg, I was like, all right.
Time for something else.
Time for something else. Yeah, that's just kind of my mentality. I'm like, okay, what's next? What am I working towards now? And so it's nice in September.
What are you working towards now? You've got that live, the kind of like porch record, right?
Yep.
Tell me more what's going on with Old Bear and kind of because last time we talked a few years ago, right? It's like We're just kind of talking about the creative things that you're doing in the studio. I mean, you guys did like a music video I saw where you used like a felt board, yeah. It was like the coolest thing, man. It like brought so much joy to my heart. It was like kitschy and just like the right way. And so kind of what is your vision for Old Bear, like as you go into the future? I mean, is this one like is Bellsberg, is that kind of like the biggest record to date so far?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that I've done, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I've done I did Mitch's last project with him, the Shrugging of the Shoulders, I think it's called. I've done a few projects with Kevin Max now, and so I'm working on this project right now with these guys called The Ascendants. And it's hopefully first single will drop in January. There's I just did a record with a kid named Eric Brumley that's like kind of like, he's got the most insane voice of anybody. I mean, he sounds like he's, he can sing it all type of mentality. He's actually in like a Soundgarden cover band, like, and that's kind of how he uses that as a way to like do ministry. They're called like Say Hello to Heaven is the name of the band. But anybody who can sing Chris Cornell, that's pretty impressive, So so that record is coming out. So Eric Brumley's record will come out early next year. The Ascendants record will come out early next year. And then I'm starting a new series called Around the Mic, which obviously Brothers McClurg has done Around the Mic stuff, but I want to do it with like different artists. So I'm going to start recording that series, which will probably come out. I don't know. I'm going to go and record. I know Cindy Morgan and I have been chatting about her doing one. And so I just have to kind of like rally the troops. That's like another series that I want to do. That's kind of like, just gotta chase it,
So what is your gravitation towards kind of it's kind of like you're looking at revitalizing these like the old guard almost is how I think of it. It's like, oh, Kevin Max, everybody remembers him from DC Talk, right?
Right.
But it's like the guy's been around forever. He's like Cindy Morgan. Like, what is kind of gravitating you towards this era of artists?
That's a good question. I just like legacy artists and doing something totally new with them that kind of throws. I mean, a great example would be, and I think we talked about Honor. A great example of this would be what Rick Rubin did with Johnny Cash, right? I mean, that was like a legacy. I mean, obviously he's huge, but I mean, that when I first saw that, I was like, well, I'd like to do records with people that, have been around for a long time and still have a lot to say. And I don't know. There's just, and sometimes when you work with artists like that, there's a weight to the way they sing and the way they phrase things that you don't always get with the younger people, you know. And I think I also think sometimes with the younger artists, there's a lot more expectation about, you know, you have a lot more stress from labels, and they want you to make it a certain, they will say a lot of them have a lot more handlers. That's how we use it, where there's a lot more expectation of what should and should happen. And I just want to make cool music and believe that it will find the audience it's supposed to reach, you know? And so the great thing is, doing a record like the Rich Mullins thing helps my reputation. It's not just like, well, who's this guy? You know, I did finally do something that made some impact, and I'm a part of that with a bunch of different people. So I love that I get to point to that as I'm kind of working now on these future ideas of like, hey, this did work. This was successful. Maybe not in the way of, you know, Bethel music or things of that nature, even though I feel like we've been trying to chase, you know, Old Bear's trying to chase the kind of singer-songwriter crowd where you wrestle with your faith. I mean, a bunch of artists will do one or two worship songs on a record, but it's primarily kind of went away from conventional worship music and more storytelling type stuff, you know. And so with Kevin, it just was, him and I started to become friends over a record he did about Larry Norman, and he did like a cover of a Larry Norman record, and that's how I met him, actually. And we've been able to work together on a bunch of things and find common ground. And the stuff that I've been doing with him is much more stripped than what he normally does. Because I'm trying to make it, the way I would word it is like, you know, you're not playing in arenas for, you know, a large DC Talk audience anymore. You're relating more to an indie audience. So let's have the production kind of meet that idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you like when you're working with an artist, how does that relationship happen from the production standpoint? Like, do they come to you and go, hey, I got some songs. You're like, well, here's how I'd want to approach it, and try and like who's carrying the bulk of that weight?
I mean, it's different in every situation. Obviously, if it's an artist now that I've worked with more than once, which there's, you know, Ian Zumbach, who you would probably love the record I did.
His voice is awesome. I kind of found him on the Bellsberg thing, and I'm like, okay, now I need to go listen to a bunch of his stuff because it's like a standout.
Yeah, you know, he's putting out a new EP that I helped produce. The first single's out right now called "Ordinary" that him and my brother wrote, and it'll make you cry. It's great. But yeah, I think that it's so if it's an artist that's already worked with me, generally we kind of have a way that we like to operate together that's different. But I do try to bring ideas to people that I think would be cool for them to try, that are looking to do something new, that maybe haven't done something new in a while. So that tends to be the artists that have been around for a while. Not that I do work with younger artists too. I'm just saying that like they're more in a chance of like, well, I already have been to the mountaintop. I don't really, that doesn't mean anything to me anymore. I don't really care about, you know, radio singles and things of that nature. You know, and so I try to, I don't know. That's the both end of it, I guess, is that for these two particular projects that I'm working on now, it was ideas that I brought to the artist, like with Jimmy Abeg and those guys, and then obviously with Bellsberg. But I think that you're either a producer that's like a craftsman, where you are really good at operating within Americana, so you have your rules that you operate in Americana.
Mm-hmm.
You don't use a synthesizer. You don't use, you stay within those perimeters. And for me, I think I try to be more a producer that pushes the boundaries and colors between the lines of like, well, let's put things together that we really like. I tend to have a gravitation towards minimalism, like stripping everything down to be very minimal, and then rebuilding it instead of like, okay, there's all this noise and stuff happening. Let's just get a really good core thing going, which is like kind of like what Bellsberg was, even though we didn't really build that much on it. That wasn't the idea. But I tend to do that a lot with artists of like, let's really boil it down and then kind of rebuild it. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's so funny. Like I'll like track demos of my songs in the basement or whatever, and it's amazing how many things I put on it. And then but in the end, I'm just like, it's all gone. I just rip it all back out. And it's like, but that one idea I got from that 17th track, that was the thing that made the one track work, like.
Totally. You got to kind of be willing to go on the journey, I guess, right? That's give and the take. But I don't think if you're not going to be a producer that's trying to just, make the next big worship song or radio single or whatever, the other way you can do it is just by being yourself and being different. People coming to you knowing that it's going to be something unique. And I think that there are tons of producers throughout time that kind of did that. And it's just a different path to take. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. I mean, one of my best friends, Evan, who mixes most of the Old Bear stuff, he's consistently doing country records in Nashville, like working on big country records. And that takes a gift to be able to do that, because to me, it just feels like such a foreign idea, but it's like, that's an art form in itself. And you can make a lot of money if you can do that, you can operate fear. So, that's what everybody's different, I think, but he loves to do creative stuff too. And he loves he works with me because he's like, I never know what I'm going to get when I'm working with you, what you're up to or what you're pushing towards, so he can feed into that, in the mix process. That balance. So
it's finding that balance of like rawness that sounds good. Right. Cause it's like, cause you can have things that sound raw and that just sound bad. Right. And then there's this other, and then there's the other, like, well, now it's too polished. Now it sounds too whatever. It's like trying to find that middle ground and going like, no, it sounds perfect. It sounds like it is. Do you think that, I mean, you guys, your band, your brothers McClure, I mean, you guys, when you play, I mean, you play in a very raw setting. I mean, you guys are 3 dudes and microphones and guitars. And do you think that kind of that skill of being able to do that contributes to the production side of just kind of like, okay, we know how to capture this because we do it all the time without the tracks and the stuff? It's just like, we just do it with with the tools we have right here.
Yeah, I think it definitely does, for sure. I am definitely drawn to real sounds versus just like stuff off a plugin or Pro Tool. Like, I like using Pro Tools to manipulate sounds. That's what I love about Pro Tools, that it can help be a great paintbrush or bring in these different colors that you can use. But I always try to start from an actual like real source, like this record that I'm working on, the one guy, Ben, is like a well-known photographer. So he brought in all of his old cameras, his collection of cameras, and we sampled all the different shutters, all the different, and then put it through Pro Tools and we're just doing bizarre stuff with it, making these sounds, but it came from like a real source. It wasn't just like we took it, and that, to me, that feeling of organic is so important in music now. You can make organic records that are electronic. You can make organic records that it doesn't have to just be acoustic, but for us, that's what we're usually drawn to, is like kind of folky, slightly tinged bluegrass, Americana country, and then some weird stuff on top of it. But yeah, I think it does play a piece in trying to find a real factor in the music that is, feels organic, that feels like it's coming from a real source and not just like off a plugin or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with plugins. I like plugins too, but to me, a lot of that's like icing on the cake. Once you already have the bones of something great, then it's like, well, what if we just put one synth on top of this? Because you wouldn't expect it, but you already have all these real organic instruments. Now I feel like I can have the payoff of a fake sound because the rest of it's like really organic. So when we're in the studio, that's always the model of like, is this have enough organic sounds up against the keyboard sounds? Is there enough push and pull between the real and the fake so that it's not just, because doing that it's a lot harder to do that if you just have like a bedroom studio, because you're just using, I have these drum samples and I can trigger this and that. And for me, when I hear that stuff, it doesn't always hit my ear pleasingly. It's like, oh, it sounds kind of cheap in that way. But if you're in a big warehouse like we are, where you can just take drumsticks and bang them on a pipe and make a rhythm and sample it, we do that kind of stuff all the time. And it's just like, oh, you hear that? That's just the door shutting, the squeak of the door. And you just put a long reverb on it and put distortion on it, and it makes this crazy sound. And it fits. It's wild, but it fits it. We did a bunch of stuff like that in Ryan Clare's new record. He put out a hymns record called Hymns and Spiritual Songs that you probably would really dig. And there's a song on there called Go Down Moses, and we use like harmoniums and all this different stuff to like create this palette. And it's bizarre, but it's like, it's fun. It's cool. I mean, I enjoy it. So
are you ever in the middle of stuff and have an artist looking at you like, so what are you doing? Like, no, trust me, man. I'm going to squeak this door. It's going to, just trust me what I hear in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when I operate in the studio, that's where the intersection of worship comes in. Because when you're worshiping God, you have to, you're catching these moments that are just happening organically that feel so right. And I think that stuff happens all the time in the studio, where someone will do something accidentally and you're like, whoa, that's cool, because it was unexpected, but you did it and you didn't mean to do it. And whatever that is, whether it's a sound, whether it's like playing a melody that wasn't expected. But generally, yeah, I try to forewarn people, like if we're mining for those other worldly sounds, like, hey, we need to just work on a couple things here that are unexpected. Like what's going to make this more than just the song and a guitar player and a drummer? What are some added elements that'll make this more interesting, that takes it to a new place? So I think that there's always that push and pull of people looking at you sometimes like, really? We're like, no, just wait till you hear it in the mix. It's going to be cool. It's, and most of the time it does work out. Sometimes you're like, yeah, it's not, didn't really work out. Like we were in the studio last week and Jimmy just kept using the EBow you'd use on the guitar. He kept like doing it on the banjo, like running it up and down the strings. And it was super cool sounding. And we sampled it and just put it through like a keyboard, and just started using it as like a keyboard sound of this, just him him with the banjo with Ebo, but we were just pitching it around to the different to the key of the song and all that stuff. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a push and a pull, but sometimes you got to know when to stop too. If it's like,
well, I want I don't want to take you away from your child for too long. Get snack time. You got to get snack time going.
I know, right?
But
it's never enough. Now it's dessert time. She just had McDonald's, and now it's dessert. Yeah.
Well, I love the Bellsberg record, but I've been following all the stuff that you're doing, Old Bear and everything else, and it's just it's such a, like, your passion for it comes through, and I think that's just inspiring. And I think especially for worship leaders who are in a place where, you were talking about, like, very functional. It's like very functional. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm taking this and I'm trying to make it so everybody can sing it, and I'm having to deal with all these logistics and everything else. I keep just like hammering on the, like, don't forget the creativity. Don't forget the creativity. Like, that's why we all got into it in the first place, Totally. And so it's cool to see you pushing the envelope in those ways. I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's a huge part of I feel like my worship to God too is, and I think we need to kind of remember that, because I think that like we were talking about earlier, there are intersections where functionality and creativity can work together to serve the church and to serve people that you're doing ministry with. So, and it doesn't have to feel and look at all like any big worship team. In fact, it would probably be more authentic to just do what you do in a unique way, what you have in a unique way, so that it blesses those people in that specific area of the world, in that specific town, so I love that you guys do that you emphasize that.
I have a question.
Yes.
I guess this is more for our listeners. If you are listening to this while watching the podcast on YouTube, which you can, and I think on Spotify too, they have a video. That's besides the point. If you're watching this podcast, did it feel like you were on a FaceTime call? Because I feel like that was, dare I say, the vibe he was setting.
Well, he's walking all around. Think of it as like a tour of his space.
It's lovely. I mean, it's more intimate experience. He's not just sitting at a desk.
Right.
You're fully immersed in his situation.
And it is very Chris. Like he cares about, like, authenticity. He cares about rawness, and so I just love it. He's so great to talk to. We've talked a bunch since then too. It's been good to reconnect. So, and he has great taste in music. That was one of the things that first connected us, was just like, oh, you like this band, and next thing you know, you're like, all right,
I like this
guy. Did we just become best friends?
Are we best friends? I feel like we're best friends.
See, now that would be stalky.
I mean, but you actually had a conversation. You didn't just replicate a video on Instagram.
Okay, fine, all right. It's nuance. This is a lot of nuance. I'm still learning. I mean, my wife, actually, Allie, will say to me, she's like, it's so cute. Like, every once in a while, you like send me a funny video. It's like you just discovered social media, like 15 years into it existing. And I'm like, kind of.
And being an internet, I don't want to call you an internet personality.
Well, no.
Well, being on the internet, like you.
Right.
Worship Artistry has been around for like 10 years.
Right. But I'm a much more private person. And so when he was going to the Innovators Conference, that I was like, oh my gosh, I have to learn to do something. And also, I have to say that, like, when I first started Worship Artistry, I would say there was kind of, the world wasn't as open to all the things. Like, I felt like there was more way to mess up on social media than there was to win on social media, because it just seemed like people were looking for you to do something wrong. And, I was like, oh, I don't know if somebody's going to go like, oh, you are involved in this denomination and now I don't like you. Like, I didn't know, Yeah. And I feel like the world is much more open at this point. And, there's so many people getting into real trouble on social media. Like,
no one's going to care about you, Jason.
If the worst thing I do is get blocked by somebody I don't know, I feel like I'm winning.
That's okay.
I'm winning. It's working out.
You are.
So if you want to see me stumble through social media, follow me at jason.houtsma. And if you want to check out the Bellsberg sessions, please do. If you haven't listened to it, just do it.
I'll include a link in the bio, or not the bio. Sorry, the description of this podcast.
Yep. See, it's all this. It's all this stuff.
All this lingo.
I'm not the only one that messes up sometimes.
Yes. And be sure to go to worshipartistry.com/sign up to get a free trial. You get access to over 600 lessons, and you can get it for your whole worship team if you are on a team. If you're just an individual and you're wanting to learn, we have that too. So go check that out, and we hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.
And I actually know what I'm doing in those videos.